The crimson dust swirled around Lysara's ankles as she advanced, her ceremonial blade catching the dying light of Cinder's Edge's twin suns. Before her, cornered against the razor-sharp stone walls of the narrow canyon, stood Joran, a trespasser on sacred Volcari hunting grounds. The merchant's empty hands were raised in surrender, but his eyes betrayed no fear, only a disturbing calm that made Lysara's grip tighten on her weapon. "Any last words before you join the spirits of the Red Waste?" she demanded, her voice carrying the authority bestowed upon her by generations of Volcari warriors. "Yeah," he smiled, the expression incongruous with his predicament. "You're holding it wrong." The words hung in the air between them, as tangible as the dust. For a heartbeat, Lysara's confidence faltered. Then rage replaced confusion. How dare this outsider, this weaponless intruder, speak to her of blade technique? She, who had been trained since childhood in the sacred hunt. With a primal scream, she lunged forward, intent on silencing his insolence forever. But as her blade arced through the air, Joran moved like water. A simple sidestep, a gentle redirection of her momentum. And suddenly, Lysara found herself stumbling past him, her ceremonial dagger clattering against the canyon floor. Before she could recover, his foot was on the blade, and his eyes met hers with that same infuriating serenity. "The final hunting cycle before the season of fire winds brings many desperate creatures to the surface," he said, as if teaching a child, "including those who think themselves predators." Humiliation burned hotter than the desert sun on Lysara's skin. This moment of disgrace would haunt her forever. A Volcari warrior, disarmed by an unarmed man who hadn't even struck a blow. She spat at his feet, a gesture of final defiance. "Kill me then. A warrior without honor is already dead." Joran removed his foot from the blade and stepped back. "I'm not here to kill anyone. Least of all, someone who could become so much more than what her traditions have limited her to be." With those cryptic words, he turned and disappeared into a crevice too narrow for Lysara to follow, leaving her alone with her fallen weapon and shattered pride. The council chamber of the Volcari fortress vibrated with the collective outrage of the elders. Lysara knelt before them, head bowed, but spine rigid with defiance. Above them all sat Aranax, the tribe's leader, her weathered face set in lines of disappointment and anger. "You return from the sacred hunt not with glory, but with shame." Aranax's voice cut through the murmurs. "You were disarmed by an unarmed outsider. You failed to complete the ritual hunt. The ancestors turned their faces from you." Lysara's knuckles whitened as she pressed her fists against the stone floor. "I will hunt him down. I will restore my honor." "No." The single word from Aranax silenced the chamber. "The hunting cycle is complete. The fire winds approach. And you," her eyes narrowed, "are no longer worthy to carry the meteor blade of our ancestors." With ceremonial precision, an elder approached and removed the sheathed dagger from Lysara's belt. The loss of the weapon felt like the severing of a limb. "Until you can prove yourself worthy of the Volcari name, you are cast out. May the fire winds teach you humility, if they do not consume you first." The pronouncement fell like a death sentence. Exile during firewind season was nearly certain death. But death, Lysara thought, as she rose to her feet, would be preferable to living with this dishonor. "I will return," she promised, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. "And when I do, the Volcari will see true strength." Aranax's expression remained impassive. "Go, then. The fortress gates will close behind you until the next hunting cycle, if you survive to see it." Lysara turned, feeling the eyes of her tribe burning into her back as she walked out of the chamber, out of the fortress, and into the merciless expanse of Cinder's Edge. Behind her, the massive stone gates ground shut with a finality that echoed across the red wastes. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, a water skin, and a simple utility knife, barely more than a tool. Nothing like the ceremonial blade that had been her birthright. But she had something more valuable, a target for her rage. Somewhere in this wasteland, the merchant called Joran still walked, and Lysara would find him, with or without her tribe's blessing. The first 3 days in the desert stripped away Lysara's arrogance, like the winds stripped moisture from her skin. By the 4th day, survival had replaced vengeance as her primary concern. The utility knife proved more valuable for digging for water root tubers than it would have been for combat. Her Volcari training, focused so heavily on the ritual hunt, had left gaps in her knowledge of basic survival. On the 7th day, delirious from heat and thirst, she stumbled upon tracks leading to a small oasis hidden between 2 knife-like rock formations. As she rushed toward the water, her parched mind failed to register the warning signs: the too perfect arrangement of rocks, the unnatural stillness. The trap sprung as she reached the water's edge. A net whipped up from beneath the sand, encasing her in a cocoon of rough fibers. Lysara thrashed uselessly as shadows detached themselves from the rocks around her. Desert bandits, 3 of them, their faces wrapped in protective cloth, their eyes evaluating her like a piece of merchandise. "A Volcari warrior, by the looks of her," said one, prodding her through the net with a staff. "Far from home." "No ceremonial blade," noted another. "An outcast, then. Worth little as ransom." "Still worth something in the flesh markets of the southern crags," said the third, the apparent leader. "Bind her properly. We move before dusk." Despair threatened to overwhelm Lysara as they cut away the net and began to bind her wrists. This inglorious end was the ultimate punishment for her failure. Not even a warrior's death, but slavery in distant lands. A whisper of movement was her only warning before chaos erupted. A shadow dropped from the rocks above, landing with impossible lightness. The first bandit fell before he could turn, a precise strike to the back of his neck rendering him unconscious. The second managed to draw a blade before an expertly thrown stone struck his wrist, sending the weapon spinning away. The leader, more prepared than his companions, charged with a roar, directly into a simple sidestep that left him stumbling into the oasis pool. As he surfaced, sputtering with rage, the shadow solidified into a familiar form. "Joran." He stood between Lysara and the remaining conscious bandit, unarmed, but somehow more threatening than a fully equipped warrior. "This one is under my protection," he said simply. "Leave now, and we'll consider this a misunderstanding among desert travelers." The leader dragged himself from the pool, dignity drowning in his soaked clothes. "Who are you to make demands? We are the Red Scorpions. We rule these wastes." Joran sighed, as if disappointed by the response. What happened next occurred so quickly that Lysara's trained eyes could barely follow. Joran moved like a dust devil, fluid, unpredictable, and when he stopped, both bandits lay groaning on the sand, neither seriously injured but both thoroughly subdued. He turned to Lysara, who stood frozen in disbelief, and began untying her bonds. "Why?" she demanded as the ropes fell away. "Why help the person who tried to kill you?" "Perhaps I see potential where others see only tradition," he replied. "Or perhaps I simply dislike slavers more than I dislike misguided warriors." He stepped back, giving her space. "You've been tracking me for days. Poorly. I might add. What do you hope to accomplish?" Pride demanded she attack him again, to reclaim her honor through combat. But thirst and exhaustion had worn away the sharp edges of her certainty. "You humiliated me. I lost everything because of you." "No," Joran corrected gently. "You lost everything because your people value rigid tradition over adaptability, because they worship a single way of fighting, of living, of thinking, when the desert itself teaches that only those who adapt survive." He gestured to the unconscious bandits. "Did you notice how I defeated them? Not through superior strength or weapons, but through understanding. I used their expectations against them. I moved like water around stone." Not like stone against stone. Despite herself, Lysara was intrigued. The Volcari way has kept us alive for generations. Surviving isn't thriving, Joran countered. When was the last time your tribe's numbers grew? When did you last innovate, create, build something new? You're slowly dying, and your traditions are the beautiful shroud you've wrapped yourselves in. His words struck with more force than any physical blow, because deep in her heart, Lysara recognized their truth. The hunting rituals grew more desperate each cycle as game became scarcer. The children born each year were fewer than the elders who joined the ancestors. "What do you propose?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Learn from me," Joran said simply. "Learn to fight like water. Then return to your people with wisdom instead of vengeance." Lysara looked at the fallen bandits. Then back at this strange merchant who fought better than any warrior she'd ever known. "And if I refuse?" Joran shrugged. "Then we part ways here. You continue your hunt for revenge, likely die in the coming fire winds, and your tribe continues its slow march toward extinction. The choice, like always, is yours." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the groans of the bandits and the whisper of the desert wind. Finally, Lysara nodded once, a gesture so slight it might have been missed by anyone watching less carefully than Joran. "I will learn," she said. "But know this, if this is a trick, if you seek to humiliate me further, I will find a way to end you, no matter what it costs me." Joran's smile was genuine, without mockery. "I would expect nothing less from a Volcari warrior. Now, help me tie up these bandits properly. Your first lesson begins with how we deal with defeated enemies." The weeks that followed transformed Lysara in ways she could never have anticipated. Joran was not merely a fighter, but a philosopher, a wanderer who had studied combat traditions across dozens of settlements scattered throughout Cinder's Edge. "Fighting like water," he explained, as they made camp one evening, "begins in the mind, not the body. Water doesn't oppose force with force. It yields, redirects, finds the path of least resistance, yet ultimately reshapes even the hardest stone." Their training began with basics that seemed insultingly simple: standing, breathing, walking with awareness of the environment. Lysara's frustration mounted until Joran blindfolded her and had her navigate a field of sharp rocks. "Your Volcari training taught you to focus on your target to the exclusion of all else," he said, as she stumbled and cut her feet. "But true awareness encompasses everything: the ground beneath you, the air currents, the tension in your opponent's shoulders before they strike." Gradually, lessons evolved into practical applications. Joran would attack suddenly, while they walked, while Lysara slept, even once while she was gathering water. At first, she responded as a Volcari warrior, meeting force with force, and invariably found herself disarmed or pinned. "You're still thinking like stone," Joran admonished. "Feel the direction of my energy and guide it past you." The breakthrough came during their 4th week together. They had taken shelter in an abandoned mining outpost as a dust storm raged outside. Joran launched a surprise attack as Lysara prepared their meager dinner. Instead of opposing his charge, she pivoted slightly, redirecting his momentum with the lightest touch, sending him stumbling past her. For a moment, both stood in shock at her success. Then, Joran laughed with genuine delight. "There! You felt it, didn't you? The moment when my force became your advantage?" Lysara nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning. "It was effortless." "That's the heart of it," Joran confirmed. "The more force your opponent brings, the more you have to work with. The greatest strength can become the greatest vulnerability." As her body learned new ways of moving, Lysara's mind began to question old certainties. The Volcari hunting rituals, which had seemed sacred and immutable, now appeared needlessly rigid. The tribe's isolation, once a point of pride, revealed itself as a slow death sentence in a changing world. "Why do you care?" she asked Joran one night, as they sat beneath the star-scattered sky. "Why invest so much in teaching a warrior who tried to kill you?" Joran was silent for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the distant pinpricks of light. "I was once like you," he finally said, "born into a tradition that valued strength above all else. My people, the Carven merchants, believed that ruthlessness in trade was the highest virtue." He turned to face her. "I watched as that philosophy destroyed us from within. Families betraying families, children raised to see compassion as weakness. When I suggested change, I was exiled, much like you." "What happened to them?" Lysara asked. "They're gone now," Joran said softly. "The last Carven caravan was ambushed 5 years ago. They had made so many enemies through their brutal trading practices that when they needed allies, none would come." He picked up a handful of red sand, letting it sift through his fingers. "I could have let them die with hatred in my heart. Instead, I chose to carry their memory by teaching others what they refused to learn. That adaptation isn't weakness. It's the only true strength." Lysara contemplated his words as the night deepened around them. For the first time, she saw Joran not as the cause of her disgrace, but as a mirror reflecting what she might become, either an agent of change or a relic of a dying tradition. Their opportunity to test Lysara's new skills came sooner than expected. While scouting the perimeter of a small settlement on the edge of the waste, they witnessed a terrifying sight: a massive dust funnel, harbinger of the approaching fire winds, bearing down on the unsuspecting villagers. "They have minutes at most," Joran shouted over the rising wind. "These early funnels can strip flesh from bone." Without hesitation, they raced toward the settlement. The villagers were already in panic, running in all directions, gathering children and valuables with no clear evacuation plan. "Listen to me!" Lysara shouted, but her voice was lost in the chaos. With sudden inspiration, she climbed onto a water cistern and used her utility knife to strike its metal surface, creating a resonant gong that cut through the noise. "The northern caves," she called, when she had their attention. "Your only chance is the northern caves." "The path is too narrow for our carts," cried an elder, pointing to the heavily laden vehicles containing their food stores. Joran assessed the situation with preternatural calm. "We need to form a human chain, pass supplies hand to hand, leave the carts." What followed was a desperate race against the approaching funnel. Lysara organized the strongest villagers into a chain, while Joran helped the elderly and children navigate the treacherous path to the caves. The wind grew fierce, stinging their skin with airborne particles of sand. A child's scream cut through the tumult. A young girl had been separated from the group, frozen in terror as the dust funnel bore down on her. Without thinking, Lysara sprinted toward her, scooping the child into her arms. The return path was cut off by a collapsing dune. Instinctively, Lysara analyzed her surroundings as Joran had taught her, looking not for the obvious escape, but for the path of least resistance. There, a narrow ravine that might provide shelter if they could reach it in time. Clutching the child to her chest, Lysara ran, not away from the funnel, but at an angle to its approach, using its own rotational energy to gain speed. They reached the ravine seconds before the full force of the funnel passed over them. Pressed against the rock face, Lysara curved her body around the child, becoming a human shield against the deadly particles that found their way into their shelter. When the howling subsided, and they emerged, battered but alive, the gratitude in the child's parents' eyes affected Lysara more deeply than any honor ceremony of the Volcari. That evening, as the villagers celebrated their survival in the caves, Joran found Lysara sitting apart, contemplative. "You used the funnel's own power to reach safety," he observed, "fighting like water, even when you didn't have time to think." Lysara examined her hands, raw and scraped from the ordeal. In that moment, all I could think was, what would Joran do? Not charge headlong into danger as a Volcari warrior might, but find the smart path, the one that acknowledges reality, rather than trying to overpower it. Joran sat beside her. The greatest warriors aren't those who never feel fear, but those who act wisely despite it. The Volcari would say I should have charged directly at the funnel, proving my courage, Lysara said with a hint of bitterness. And would the child have survived such a demonstration of courage? Joran asked quietly. The question hung between them, unanswerable yet eloquent in its simplicity. For the first time, Lysara found herself not merely questioning Volcari traditions, but seeing beyond them to a larger truth. I want to return, she said suddenly. Not for vengeance, but for change. My people are like that child, frozen in the path of destruction because they know only one way to live. Joran studied her face, searching for signs of her former rage. Finding none, he nodded. The fire winds are nearly upon us. Most paths back to the Volcari fortress will soon be impassable. Do you know another way? Lysara asked, hope kindling within her. A dangerous one, Joran admitted. Through the crystal canyons. Few attempt it, fewer survive. Why is it so deadly? The canyons amplify sound. A whisper can trigger rock slides, and they're home to creatures that hunt by vibration. The slightest footfall can attract them. Lysara considered this. A month ago, she would have seen such dangers as opportunities to prove her courage. Now, she analyzed them as problems to solve. Moving like water, she mused. Silently, adapting to the terrain, using minimal force. Joran smiled, pride evident in his expression. Exactly. It may be the perfect final test of what you've learned. As they prepared to depart the next morning, the village elder pressed a gift into Lysara's hands. A small blade of remarkable workmanship, its handle wrapped in softened hide for silent drawing. For the one who saved my granddaughter, the elder said. May it serve you better than glory. Lysara accepted the gift with humility, tucking it into her belt, not as a symbol of status, but as a practical tool for the journey ahead. As she and Joran set off toward the distant shimmer of the crystal canyons, she realized how much she had changed. The warrior who had tried to execute Joran for trespassing would never have understood the profound honor in this simple gift, given not for adherence to tradition, but for an act of compassion. The crystal canyons lived up to their deadly reputation. Towering walls of translucent mineral formations caught and fractured the sunlight, creating a disorienting kaleidoscope effect. Every footstep required careful placement. Every breath had to be measured and controlled. On their second day in the canyons, they encountered their first vibration hunter, a massive, segmented creature with blade-like appendages and no visible eyes. It sensed their presence when a small stone dislodged beneath Joran's foot. The creature's attack was lightning fast, but Joran moved faster, pulling Lysara into a crevice barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Remember, he whispered so softly, it was nearly telepathic. These creatures feel rather than see. They anticipate where you will be based on your previous movements. Lysara nodded in understanding. When they emerged from their hiding place, they moved with deliberate unpredictability, changing pace, direction, and rhythm to confuse the hunter's senses. By the fifth day, they had developed an almost supernatural awareness of their surroundings. Lysara could feel the subtle vibrations in the rock that signaled an approaching hunter or an unstable formation. She learned to move not just silently, but in harmony with the canyon itself, becoming part of its flow rather than an intruder upon it. Near the end of the passage, they faced their greatest challenge. A narrow bridge of crystal spanned a chasm so deep that its bottom was lost in darkness. Below, they could hear the chittering of dozens of vibration hunters, drawn by the subtle resonance of the crystal bridge itself. One at a time, Joran whispered. I'll go first to test its stability. Lysara caught his arm. No, I need to do this. He searched her face, then nodded once. Remember. Like water, she finished. I know. Lysara approached the bridge, every sense heightened. She could feel the crystal singing beneath her fingers as she tested its strength. Rather than fighting the subtle oscillations, she synchronized her movements with them, letting the bridge guide her steps. Halfway across, a sharp crack echoed through the canyon as a section began to give way. Instead of rushing forward in panic, Lysara dropped to a crouch, distributing her weight. She felt rather than saw the hunters below surging upward, drawn by the sound. With fluid grace, she rolled to the side as a blade-like appendage slashed through the space she had occupied a heartbeat before. In one continuous motion, she drew the village elder's blade and struck, not at the creature itself, but at a weakened crystal formation above it. The resulting shower of crystal fragments disoriented the hunter, long enough for Lysara to complete her crossing. From the safety of the other side, she signaled Joran, who followed her example with equal skill. When they finally emerged from the crystal canyons, the distant silhouette of the Volcari fortress was visible on the horizon, its massive stone walls catching the light of the setting suns. We'll reach it by tomorrow, Joran said, studying the landscape. The first true fire winds are only days away. We arrived just in time. Lysara gazed at her ancestral home with mixed emotions. When I left, I was burning with shame and rage. I return with neither. What do you return with? Joran asked. She considered the question carefully. Purpose, she finally answered. The Volcari way is dying. I can help them adapt or watch them perish like your Carven merchants. And if they reject your help, if Aranax condemns you again? Lysara's hand went to the village elder's blade. Then I will be like water. I'll find another path, another way to save what matters without destroying myself in the process. Joran smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Then, you have learned the most important lesson of all. The final approach to the Volcari fortress was more difficult than anticipated. The preliminary winds had already begun, carrying stinging particles that reduced visibility to mere meters. Lysara and Joran wrapped their faces in protective cloth, moving in the troughs between dunes to minimize their exposure. They were within sight of the massive gates when a hunting party emerged from the fortress. 5 warriors in ceremonial armor, each bearing the distinctive meteor blades of the Volcari. A welcoming committee? Joran murmured, tension evident in his stance. Lysara studied the warriors' formation. No, they're not expecting us. That's a defensive patrol. Something's wrong. As if to confirm her suspicion, the patrol suddenly dropped into combat stances, their attention focused on something beyond Lysara's field of vision. The shriek of battle cries carried on the wind, followed by the clash of metal on metal. They're under attack, Lysara gasped, already moving toward the conflict. The fire winds always bring raiders looking for shelter, but never this aggressively. They crested a dune to witness a brutal skirmish. The Volcari patrol was surrounded by at least a dozen attackers, desert nomads wielding scavenged weapons and fighting with desperate ferocity. Even as they watched, one of the Volcari warriors fell, a spear protruding from her shoulder. Without hesitation, Lysara charged into the fray, Joran at her heels. She moved as he had taught her, not meeting force with force, but redirecting it, turning the attackers' momentum against them. The village elder's blade flashed in her hand, not seeking killing blows but disabling ones. A cut to a weapon hand, a strike to unbalance, a pommel blow to stun. The Volcari warriors faltered momentarily at the sight of the exile fighting alongside them, but professionalism prevailed. With the unexpected assistance, they quickly gained the upper hand. The nomads, realizing they were outmatched, scattered into the swirling dust. As the last attacker fled, Lysara found herself face to face with the patrol leader, Nera, once her closest friend within the tribe. Lysara, Nera's voice was thick with disbelief. "You live, and you dare return?" "I come with warning," Lysara replied, sheathing her blade. "The true fire winds approach, stronger than any in living memory, and I bring knowledge that might save our people." Nera's expression hardened. "You bring an outsider to our sacred land. You fight with strange techniques. Not the Volcari way. Arronax will have you executed for such sacrilege." "Then Arronax will have to catch me first," Lysara replied, a new confidence in her voice. "Take your wounded back to the fortress. Tell Arronax that Lysara challenges her right of leadership, as is my right by the oldest traditions." Shock registered on Nera's face. "The challenge of ancestors? No one has invoked it in 3 generations." "Yet it remains our law," Lysara insisted. "Will Arronax honor the traditions she claims to protect? Or will she prove herself a hypocrite before the entire tribe?" Nera hesitated, torn between duty and the friendship they had once shared. Finally, she nodded curtly. "I will deliver your message. But know this. If you enter our lands, your outsider companion will be killed on sight. That is also our law." "He has a name," Lysara said firmly. "Joran of the Carven. And he has taught me more about true strength than all the Volcari traditions combined." Nera's expression revealed nothing as she helped her wounded comrade to her feet. "The council will convene at sunset. If you truly wish to challenge Arronax, present yourself at the western altar when the second sun touches the horizon." As the patrol retreated toward the fortress, Joran placed a hand on Lysara's shoulder. "A leadership challenge? That wasn't part of our discussions." "It's the only way," Lysara explained, watching the Volcari disappear into the swirling dust. "Arronax would never listen to an exile, but she cannot refuse the challenge of ancestors without losing all legitimacy. It's a tradition older than the fortress itself." "And what does this challenge entail?" Joran asked, concern evident in his voice. "Combat," Lysara said simply. "To first blood in times of peace, to death in times of war." "And which are we in now?" Lysara's expression was grim. "With raiders at the gates and fire winds approaching, Arronax will declare it a time of war. She'll expect to kill me and maintain her power." "Then we find another way," Joran insisted. "Running headlong into death isn't what I taught you." "No," Lysara agreed, her eyes fixed on the distant fortress. "You taught me to use my opponent's strength against them. Arronax's strength is her absolute belief in tradition. I'll use that very conviction to force change." Joran studied her face, searching for signs of the old Lysara, the proud, reckless warrior who would have embraced death for honor's sake. Instead, he found calm determination and clear-eyed purpose. "What role do you see for me in this?" he finally asked. "You must remain hidden," Lysara said firmly. "Nera was right. The tribe would kill you on sight. I need to know you're safe while I confront Arronax." "And after, if you succeed?" Lysara's expression softened slightly. "Then I'll need a teacher more than ever. A tribe in transformation requires wisdom, not just strength." Joran nodded slowly. "Very well, but remember everything I've taught you. Arronax has held power for decades. She won't relinquish it easily, even to superior skill." "I'm counting on that," Lysara said, her hand going to the village elder's blade. "Her resistance is part of my strategy." The western altar stood upon a flat-topped rock formation just outside the fortress walls. Ancient and weathered, its stone surface bore the marks of countless ceremonies and challenges throughout Volcari history. As the second sun began its descent toward the horizon, Lysara climbed the narrow path alone, dressed in the same dust-stained traveling clothes she had worn for weeks. At the altar's summit, she found a gathering waiting for her. The entire council of elders stood in a semicircle, their ceremonial robes whipping in the strengthening wind. Behind them, crowded along the fortress walls, were hundreds of Volcari tribespeople. come to witness this rare invocation of ancient law. And at the center, resplendent in battle armor polished to a mirror shine, stood Arronax. The tribal leader's face was a mask of controlled fury as she watched Lysara approach. "The exile returns," Arronax's voice carried across the altar space. Not with humility, but with the audacity to challenge the will of the council. Lysara stopped at the prescribed distance, her stance relaxed yet alert. "I return with knowledge that could save our people from extinction. The challenge of ancestors gives me the right to be heard." "You were cast out," Arronax spat. "You have no rights among the Volcari." An elder stepped forward, Soric, the keeper of laws, his blind eyes somehow finding Lysara unerringly. "The challenge transcends exile, Arronax. You know this. Any born of Volcari blood may invoke it once in their lifetime. Lysara has not previously used this right." Arronax's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. "So be it. In this time of war, with raiders at our gates and fire winds approaching, I accept the challenge to the death." She drew her ceremonial blade, its meteoric metal gleaming dully in the fading light. "Arm the challenger!" Another elder approached, bearing a meteor blade identical to Arronax's. As tradition dictated, Lysara would fight with a weapon equal to her opponent's. Lysara raised her hand, refusing the offered weapon. "I will fight with the blade I carry." Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. To refuse the sacred meteor blade was unprecedented, perhaps even sacrilegious. Arronax laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You would face a meteor blade with that common steel. Your time in the wasteland has addled your mind, child." "My time in the wasteland has opened my eyes," Lysara countered, drawing the village elder's blade. "This weapon was given to me not because of who I was born, but because of the life I saved. Its value lies not in its material, but in what it represents." "Pretty words," Arronax sneered. "That will provide little comfort when you join the ancestors tonight." Soric raised his withered hand. "The challenger has the right to choose her weapon. Let it be recorded that Lysara, daughter of Embrys, has chosen to face the meteor blade with common steel." He turned his sightless eyes toward the setting sun. "When the upper rim of the second sun disappears, the challenge begins. It ends with death or surrender." The crowd fell silent as the final sliver of the second sun balanced on the horizon. Lysara closed her eyes briefly, centering herself as Joren had taught her. She felt the wind against her skin, heard the subtle shift of Arronax's weight as the tribal leader prepared to attack, sensed the energy flowing around and through her. The sun vanished. Arronax charged. The tribal leader's attack was precisely what Lysara had expected. A full frontal assault designed to overwhelm through superior strength and speed. It was the Volcari way, direct and powerful. A month ago, Lysara would have met it with similar force and, against Arronax's greater experience, would have certainly lost. Instead, she moved like water. A slight pivot, a minimal redirection of Arronax's momentum, and the tribal leader's blade sliced through empty air. Lysara made no counterattack, choosing instead to establish a rhythm of evasion that would frustrate her opponent. "Fight me, coward!" Arronax snarled after her third failed assault. "I am fighting," Lysara replied calmly. "Just not as you expect." The battle became a stark contrast in styles. Arronax, powerful and direct, her meteor blade whistling through the air with killing intent. Lysara, fluid and responsive, never opposing force with force, always redirecting, always adapting. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This was not the Volcari way of combat they had been raised to revere. Yet there was an undeniable beauty to Lysara's movements, an efficiency that made Arronax's attacks seem increasingly wasteful and crude by comparison. As the duel continued, Arronax's frustration grew visible. Her attacks became wilder, less controlled, burning precious energy in massive swings that Lysara evaded with minimal effort. Sweat poured down the tribal leader's face, while Lysara appeared barely winded. "What game do you play?" Arronax demanded during a momentary pause, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "If you cannot defeat me, have the courage to die with honor." "I'm not here to defeat you," Lysara replied. "I'm here to show a better way." With a roar of rage, Arronax launched a desperate attack, putting all her remaining strength behind a downward slash that would have cleaved Lysara from shoulder to hip. At the last possible moment, Lysara sidestepped and extended her foot slightly, just enough to trip Arronax as her momentum carried her forward. The tribal leader crashed to the stone altar, her meteor blade skittering away. Before she could recover, Lysara was above her. The village elder's blade pressed against her throat. The crowd held its collective breath. By all the laws of the challenge, Lysara had won the right to end Arronax's life and claim leadership of the tribe. "Do it!" Arronax hissed, defiant even in defeat. "Complete your victory!" Lysara studied the woman beneath her blade, the leader who had cast her out, who had been willing to kill her for the sake of tradition. Then, with deliberate care, she stepped back and sheathed her weapon. "I refuse to kill you," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the altar. "Not out of mercy, but because your death would solve nothing. The Volcari way is dying, not because of any one leader, but because it refuses to adapt." She turned to address the gathered council and tribespeople. "I have seen what awaits us if we cling to our rigid traditions. Extinction. The same fate that befell the Carven merchants and countless other cultures that refused to evolve." "Blasphemy!" Arronax struggled to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "The Volcari way has sustained us for generations, and now it's killing us," Lysara countered. "Each hunting cycle brings less game. Each year sees fewer children born. The fire winds grow stronger, the raiders more desperate. We cannot fight these changes with meteor blades and hunting rituals." She gestured toward the horizon, where the first tendrils of the true fire winds were visible as glowing red streamers against the darkening sky. "But we can adapt. We can learn to fight like water instead of stone, to use the very forces that threaten us to become stronger." An elder stepped forward, not Sorik, but Thela, the youngest of the council. "You speak of changes, yet you invoke our oldest tradition to be heard. Is this not a contradiction?" "No," Lysara replied. "It's the essence of what I've learned. We honor our past not by freezing it in place, but by allowing it to flow into a new future. The challenge of ancestors exists precisely because our forebears knew that sometimes change must be forced upon us." "And who taught you these revolutionary ideas?" Arronax demanded, still defiant despite her defeat. "Some wasteland philosopher? Some soft city dweller who never faced the harsh realities of survival?" Lysara hesitated, knowing the risk in her answer. "A man called Joran, last of the Carven merchants. He showed me how rigid adherence to tradition destroyed his people. He taught me to fight like water, to adapt without losing my essence." "An outsider!" Arronax seized on this admission, turning to the council. "She brings outsider philosophy to corrupt our sacred ways. This alone invalidates her challenge." Before the council could respond, a new voice rang out from the edge of the altar. "The challenge stands." All eyes turned to see Joran, standing at the top of the path, calm and unarmed despite the dozens of hostile warriors surrounding him. "Who are you to interpret our laws, outsider?" Arronax demanded. "I am no one," Joran replied, moving to stand beside Lysara. "But I have studied the histories of 100 cultures, including the ancient texts of the Volcari. Your own records state that the challenge of ancestors exists precisely to bring new blood and new ideas when the tribe stagnates." He addressed the council directly. "Your ancestors were wise enough to build adaptation into your most sacred traditions. Will you now reject that wisdom?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Many looked to Sorik, the keeper of laws, whose blind eyes seemed to be seeing something beyond the physical realm. He speaks truth, Sorik finally pronounced. The first codex says, when the old path leads to the cliff's edge, a new path must be found. Lysara has won the challenge fairly. By our oldest law, she now has the right to implement one significant change to Volcari tradition. Aranax's face drained of color. One change? She would destroy everything we are. No, Lysara said firmly. I would save what makes us truly Volcari, our resilience, our community, our connection to this harsh land. What I would change is how we express these qualities. She turned to face the tribe, her voice strengthening. My one change is this. From this day forward, the Volcari will no longer measure strength solely by victory in combat or success in the hunt. We will measure it equally by adaptability, by wisdom, by the ability to protect our people from threats that cannot be defeated by blades alone. The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, Thala stepped forward and knelt before Lysara. I would learn this way of water, she said, for the sake of my unborn child, who deserves a future. One by one, others joined her, younger warriors first, then families with children, then even some of the older hunters. Not all, certainly. Many stood with Aranax, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. Change would not come easily or completely. But it had begun. As the first true fire winds began to howl around the fortress, the Volcari retreated within its walls, all of them, including Lysara and Joran. The challenge had been honored, the change accepted, at least officially. That night, in the council chamber where she had once been exiled, Lysara stood before the elders. Aranax was notably absent, having retreated to her quarters to nurse both her physical wounds and her wounded pride. The coming days will be difficult, Sorik warned. Not all will embrace this new path. Aranax still has many supporters. I don't expect immediate acceptance, Lysara acknowledged. Change like water is gradual yet persistent. It reshapes slowly but irrevocably. And your teacher? Thala asked, glancing at Joran, who stood quietly at the chamber's edge. Will he remain to help guide this transformation? Lysara looked to Joran, the question in her eyes. He stepped forward, addressing the council with respect. If I am welcome, I will stay through the fire-wind season and teach those willing to learn. After that, he glanced at Lysara. I have other cultures to visit, other knowledge to gather and share. And I have a tribe to lead, not as its ruler, but as its guide through difficult changes. Lysara added, perhaps, when the winds subside, we might establish routes to other settlements, trade knowledge as well as goods. One change at a time, young one, Sorik cautioned, though a slight smile softened his words. The river shapes the canyon, but not in a single flood. Later, as the fire winds reached their full fury outside the fortress walls, Lysara found Joran on an interior balcony, watching the storm through a narrow slit in the stone. Do you regret sparing Aranax? He asked, as she joined him. She will not make your path easy. If I had killed her, I would have proven that the old way is still supreme, that problems are solved through elimination rather than integration. Lysara replied, besides, opposition sharpens ideas. Aranax will force us to refine our arguments, to prove that adaptation works through results, not just theory. Joran nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. You've become the teacher now. I had an excellent model, Lysara acknowledged. Though I'm still not sure why you risked death to correct a stranger's blade grip in the middle of a wasteland. Joran's laugh was barely audible above the howling winds. I saw something in you, a potential for transformation that exceeded the rigid form you'd been pressed into. Just as water, given the right conditions, can become either ice or steam while remaining fundamentally itself. They fell silent, watching the dance of dust and wind beyond the fortress walls. The storm that had once seemed an existential threat now appeared different to Lysara's eyes. Not an enemy to be fought, but a force to be respected, understood, and perhaps someday even utilized. As dawn approached and the winds began to subside, Lysara made her way to the fortress's highest point, the Ancestors' Spire, where generations of Volcari leaders had watched the rising suns. In her hand was the village elder's blade, no less valuable for being made of common steel rather than meteoric metal. The first rays of morning illuminated a landscape transformed by the fire winds. Dunes shifted, landmarks buried or revealed, the very shape of the land rewritten in a single night. Yet beneath these surface changes, the essence of Cinder's Edge remained. So too with the Volcari. Lysara thought. Change was coming, inevitable, necessary, and ultimately revitalizing. The tribe would resist, adapt, transform, but their core identity would endure, perhaps even strengthen. In the distance, barely visible through the lingering haze, she could make out the silhouette of a small settlement, the village they had saved, its inhabitants sheltering in the northern caves. Soon, with the winds abated, they would emerge to rebuild. Perhaps this time, they might rebuild with Volcari assistance rather than in fear of Volcari hunting parties. "A new cycle begins," she murmured, raising the blade to catch the sunlight. No longer a weapon of execution, but a tool of transformation. No longer held wrong, but differently, with purpose rather than tradition guiding its use. Beyond the horizon, unseen but certain, other settlements, other cultures face their own challenges of adaptation. Someday, Lysara would visit them, learn from them, share with them, continuing the cycle of growth that Jaren had begun by sparing her life and offering wisdom instead of death. But for now, this fortress, this tribe, this moment required her full attention. The path of water was never straight, never simple, but always, inevitably, it found its way forward.